website. So I'm just letting everyone know that this will be a recorded session. If you do have questions throughout tonight's presentation, please do put those into the chat. We'd like to capture any questions you have as we present our LCAP. I will be starting the presentation tonight, and then Dr. John Paramo will be presenting on some of our action items in regards to goals 2 and 3 of our LCAP. But I'll go ahead and get started with our first couple of slides. So just a refresher, if you've been with us through our previous meetings, that the goals of our LCAP and a lot of the metrics and action items included in our LCAP are aligned to 8 state priorities for us that are used to guide what we do with our funds for supplemental. Additionally, we have our own local goals, our BUSD board goals that are aligned to our LCAP. And our LCAP is really organized around these 4 goals. So our meeting right before this one was on goal 1, which is our primary budget items of supporting high quality instruction of the state standards. And a lot of our action items and funds are directed towards that goal. Tonight, we'll be looking at goals 2 and 3. Goal 2 primarily focused on giving students a physically, emotionally, and mentally healthy environment at our schools, as well as parental involvement. And then the third goal is the recruitment and retention of quality employees. And you'll see some action items and metrics that are geared towards that goal as well. So as a reminder, our LCAP, the funds that we receive are determined by the number of unduplicated pupils we have at our schools. We do give base monies through LCAP funding, which is monies that all school districts receive based on average daily attendance and enrollment in our schools. In addition to that base funding, we receive supplemental funds that are derived by the numbers of students we have that meet these categories. The term unduplicated refers to the fact that students may meet multiple categories, but are only counted once as far as any additional funding we may receive. So you may be concerned that the far right column of total unduplicated count, the math does not add up when you go across and add up those numbers when you look at each individual criteria. But that's because some students will meet multiple criteria, but are still only counted once. Pointing out in this data that one area where we've seen an increase in our unduplicated count is in English learners, especially at our high school and secondary schools. You can also see that the trend has been that our unduplicated count has been going down, although we've stabilized a little bit from last year. So we're still concerned that that trend is moving in a downward direction, partially due to declining enrollment. But we're glad to see that it's stabilized a little bit and increased slightly from at least last year. But again, these students are where our funds are derived from, and this is where we need to spend our funds on, is supporting these students. So BUSD LCAP goal 2, we're going to look at our metrics, which is the measurements we use to see how we are progressing in this goal, and then our actions as far as the items we have identified to fund in order to support these unduplicated students. So just a reminder of what this goal is, and here are our metrics. So goal 2 metrics, the first series of metrics that we look at are really in regards to graduation rate for the most part. But we have some other metrics sprinkled in as well. So our A through G rate is one of those, where we've seen a continued increase, small increments there. The first metric that's on this slide is our DNF rate when it comes to middle and high school. And we have partial data, so we will have the full set of data at the conclusion of this school year. But you can see we're pretty consistent with the number of Ds and Fs from the fall and this year compared to our 2021 baseline. And I jumped right into these metrics, but I do want to explain that the metric is really the goal, or what we're looking to do with any of these data points. We have a 2021 baseline from the beginning of this plan. Our desired outcome will be in 2023-24 when we're at the conclusion of 3 years for this LCAP cycle. And so what we're looking at is year 2 and how we're progressing towards our 3-year goal. And some of these, again, are not complete for this year, but in a lot of these metrics, we look at the data from last year as our data, because most of these are reporting a year after we've concluded. So down here at the bottom, like I said, we have graduation rates. Our goal is to increase that by 2%, and we've met that goal just in year 2. So hopefully, if we can maintain or increase slightly, we will meet that goal at the end of the 3-year cycle. And those numbers do look good, all the way up to about 96% in most areas. So on our next slide, we have additional goals where we look at the graduation rate for various subgroups. And again, progressing in the right direction, seeing an increase across the board. A lot of this is in part due to some legislation that was put in place during the pandemic or post-pandemic to be able to support students in finishing their high school career and graduate on time. But you can see those graduation rates look good across all those subgroups. Our last metric on this slide is the suspension rate. And you can see that's gone down slightly. And so our goal is 1%. We're making a slight increase. We're moving in the right direction for that one, a slight decrease in the percentage of students that were suspended. Our third slide of metrics is our school attendance rate. This has been sort of an issue for a lot of districts in Southern California or across the nation, especially with COVID-19 and requirements for students to stay home if they're not feeling well. But we're not too far off our attendance rate baseline from 2020 and 2021. And so we're at 93% there. Chronic absenteeism rate. This is the one that's a little more dramatically impacted by some of the requirements of COVID, as well as sickness in our students returning back to in-person instruction. So 19% of students were determined to be chronically absent last year. How a student is determined as chronically absent is if they've missed 10% of the school year with absences. That includes excused or unexcused absences. So illness, doctor's appointments, things like that still count towards that percent, 10%. And so we see an uptick in that compared to what our baseline was pre-pandemic, but that's very consistent with what other school districts and schools are seeing. Our dropout rate for our 4-year adjusted cohort has increased along with our other graduation rates. Our middle school dropout rate has consistently been at 0%, with our students finishing middle school or moving on to high school. And then our student expulsions for the district for the last couple of years has remained at 0. No percentage there, and no expulsions for our district as a baseline or from any of our mid-year updates. Progressing through our next slide of metrics, you'll see some metrics that are derived from our school satisfaction survey. So hopefully, if you're with us tonight, you were able to participate in our survey that was just completed a few weeks ago. So that data is still being disaggregated and analyzed, and we'll have that data by the end of the year. So we'll be able to report out on our school satisfaction survey results when we take our LCAP to the school board in our town hall meeting. So we'll have that data at the conclusion of the school year to share. But you can see our baseline information is there, and we're prepared to report out on this year's results. So now we're moving to our action items. These are the actions that we're taking towards meeting this goal and what these metrics measure. And Dr. John Paramo will share some information about these actions.
Thank you, Robin. So before I go through the action items, I want to point out, if you look at the second and third column on the slide, you will see what was budgeted for each of these items and what the estimated actuals are for these items based on the first interim budget report. So the first two items are for counselors at both the middle school and the high school. And these counselors are eligible to be funded through LCAP because the counselors specifically have a caseload that includes English language learners, foster youth, homeless, and kids that are at risk. So kids that have multiple Fs. And so we monitor that. We make sure that the right kids are placed with each of these counselors that are paid through LCAP funds. And we try to make sure that the caseloads are not disproportional to the regular caseloads of the other counselors. Now, the next few items are positions. It's personnel for both Monterey High School and Community Day School. I want to point out that the students that Monterey and Community Day School service are those students that meet our subgroups. So they are students that are English language learners. They could be special education students. A lot of them could be socioeconomically disadvantaged or kids that are at risk. So therefore, they're eligible to be paid for out of LCAP. And what we have as an expenditure are 4 teachers from Monterey High School, an assistant principal from Monterey High School. We have 2 teachers at Community Day School, and we have 4 instructional assistants for Community Day School. The next slide shows intervention sections. Now, we have used intervention sections through LCAP before. At the moment, there are not any that are funded through LCAP. The next item is for the Burbank Family Service Agency. Now, our contract with a Burbank Family Service Agency far exceeds the $30,000. This is simply the district's contribution towards that contract. The rest of that portion is paid for through the city. We have initial credit summer school for English language learners. This is an opportunity for our English language learners during the summer to take classes for initial credit. Now, the reason why we want to do that is because oftentimes the language courses that these students are taking are not approved for UC. Therefore, we want them to be eligible for UC, and we provide opportunities for them to take college prep classes in the summer, and therefore become not only eligible for a high school diploma, but also eligible for college. We have funded secondary online credit recovery, which has been a huge help, especially post-pandemic, with students being able to, okay, I'll slow down, I'm sorry. Our students being able to recover credit, particularly after COVID. The next last 2 items are for our at-risk intervention specialists. We have them at both secondary and elementary. And you can see there that at the secondary, there are 6. And at the elementary, there are 11. One of the main functions of the intervention specialist is to track compulsory attendance to make sure that students are showing up to school, because we know that if they're showing up to school, they usually do better academically. And so they're tracking that. And they're also holding student study teams or attendance study teams if kids become chronically absent. And so that is a major function of the intervention specialist, as well as looking at kids who have multiple failing classes. What training do they receive? So there are regular training and meetings with the Director of Student Services. They meet as a whole group. And through that meeting that happens on a regular basis, they are not only going over case management and talking about issues that are arriving at the school, but they're also learning techniques in terms of best practice through PBIS and specific training that is provided through LA County Office of Ed. I think there was another question, Robin, in the chat, but I didn't catch it. It went by too quick.
They're also just asking if there was continued money for continued training, excuse me.
Yeah, so the training that the intervention specialists receive is training that our Director of Student Services receives, and that's ongoing. And a lot of times that doesn't require funding. And what happens is that she brings that back to whole group. And so when she meets with the intervention specialist, she's passing that training on to them.
And we're able to pull the intervention specialist for training without having to provide substitute coverage because they're not classroom positions. So that's where that doesn't require funding.
Thank you. So we talked a little bit about PBIS. This amount of money is the cost of two things. One is the cost for our contract with the Los Angeles County Office of Education. We are contracted with them and are doing training with the county on PBIS, and they are also monitoring our progress to be fully implemented. So part of it pays for the contract, and the other portion of that pays for substitute teachers when we have to pull employees from the specific school sites to do the training. We also have a person that is a specialist who's focused specifically on homeless, foster, and at-risk kids. And that is what the funding is for, is to pay for that person. We also have $10,000 that is reserved for materials, for texts, for novels, specifically directed and focused on diversity, equity, and inclusion.
So we're jumping now to goal 3. And again, goal 3 is the retainment and recruitment of quality employees. And we're going to look at a couple of metrics first before we get into the action items. But I see we have a question for John still. How is the money distributed for the DEI materials?
Sure. So each of the grade levels, particularly at secondary, have the opportunity to go through the specific evaluation process of new reading material that can be used in class. And so when the teachers for a specific grade level go through the process to approve a book, then we can access those funds to supplement it. So middle school is really, really ambitious and active, and they've been reviewing novels at a pretty consistent rate, and we've been able to help them with that. No, it's not only for secondary, but I can't really speak to elementary. I don't know if Peter can.
So when we divvy out money for elementary schools, we do it on a per pupil basis. So we take the 6,000 elementary kiddos and divide it by the pool of money, and then each school would get their allocation.
So we're going to jump into metrics for our goal 3. These have a few different areas that we look at, school satisfaction survey being one of them. But this first one was a metric regarding the DEI work that we're doing and providing training excuse me, for staff. goal was to be able to provide faculty and staff classified. And so we've been meeting that goal at the beginning of the year with our pre-service week. And then a couple of survey related metrics that we will report out on at the end of the year, like we said earlier, when we get the results back from our school satisfaction survey. And then this last one is in regards to personnel and administrators. So we've always met that goal as a local metric that we look at and measure. So we can jump right back into actions for our goal 3, and just a few metrics for goal 3, and one slide of action items. John, if you can discuss these.
Sure. So if you look at the action titles, you will see funding for 2 separate consultants. So the first line says diversity, equity, and inclusion consultant. This is a consultant that is working directly with principals and helping them in professional development to address diversity, equity, and inclusion at their school sites. And this person is also working with our teacher site leads. The third item, I'm skipping the second one, but the third item says DEI mental health consultant. And we have a separate consultant who is specifically credentialed and is a professional in mental health. And so her name is Ebony Williams, and she is also doing professional development with our principals and school sites, but it's more focused on the ways in which we need to address the social emotional issues and impact that is related to diversity, equity, and inclusion. Oftentimes that's related to hate speech and how to deal with that, and how to deal with the emotional trauma that comes with it, and what are best practices. The second item says PD on diversity, equity, and inclusion. This was with Facing History, and this was intended to be a baseline training for all our teachers in diversity, equity, and inclusion. We did that with Fidelity and are continuing to monitor and progress with that training. So that's where you see the item for that. DEI site lead stipends. Those are stipends for teacher leads at each of our school sites. And so when there is work, PD, follow-up work, the action items that need to happen at the school site, it's the teacher leads that manages that work at the school site. And then the last item is for collaboration time. It's to be able to pay for these teachers to be able to meet and get the work done and plan so that this continues and progresses at the school sites.
Great. Thank you, John. I'll just pause for just a moment just to make sure we don't have any questions about any of those action items before we jump into supplemental carryover. Okay. So supplemental carryover, if you've been with us for our previous LCAP meetings, this is something somewhat new with this year's, or not this year's plan, but this cycle of plan, the 3-year plan, that we need to look at potential carryover of funds unused, or if we had more funds than what we budgeted for to use that carryover. And so some parameters we have to consider when it comes to any carryover funds that we may have is that we are not able to delete or reword most of the plan. And LACO will check in places where we can't change to make sure it's verbatim. We're not able to go back in time and delete a goal, our 4 goals. We can add action items with additional funds as long as it supports the current goal or fits under one of our current 4 goals. We're not able to add a new goal until the end of the 3-year cycle. We can revise certain items, but we're not able, we have to provide in writing a reason for the revision. And then the district we're not able to add new positions with carryover funds. That's one of the things they look for in our plan, as these funds are not ongoing. So some of the previously proposed action items when it comes to goals 2 and 3 would be supplemental materials for DEI, which was shared, stipends for site DEI leads, and then collaboration time for our DEI leads at our sites. So these are specific to goals 2 and 3. I do apologize, this was an adjustment made on this presentation. So we'll update the one that's posted on the website. But wanted these items to be specific to goals 2 and 3. So some preliminary proposed actions. These are not specific to goal 2 or goal 3, but items that have been brought forward or part of discussion with other educational partners that we need to consider for next year's plan. One of those being support for CTE pathways, and specifically supporting our unduplicated students in being able to access those. Another item would be orientation support for immigrant students. This is somewhat aligned to some of the discussion from last year, the influx of migrants or refugee families and supporting them with adjusting to American schools. Then this third one is additional sections to reduce class size for SEDI sections. So we discussed in our instructional services presentation, goal 1, that we had made increases to the funds or budgeted items for ELD support and classroom aids in SEDI sections. But it's also been discussed now this year to try to reduce those class sizes when we have a cohort of English learners. An additional idea that has been brought forward is to look at online reading support for our English language learners. This would be through a program provided by Don Johnston called Snap and Read. And it's a browser extension that provides I guess a la carte or as needed translation, text to speech, definitions, and even text leveling with some texts, just as an increased access point for our students who are learning English. So along with these additional ideas that have been discussed during our LCAP, our 4th LCAP meeting coming up, that'll be an opportunity to discuss these items in more depth, get input from other educational partners, including everyone attending tonight, as far as what they see as priorities for any potential carryover. I would like to note that on these slides, we did want to make sure everyone was aware that we are facing a budget deficit in outlying years. So we may not be able to spend any new carryover, excuse me. We may not be able to spend any new carryover for next year with the idea of trying to make sure we can sustain everything that's in our current plan going forward. And then I had a request to put slide 22 back up. So I brought that back up to the presentation. And again, these were discussed earlier by Dr. Paramo, but these were new items for this current year. And so we'll be discussing whether to continue these for next year's plan or make additions to these. I'm going to jump to our the slide where you could see how to contact those of us here tonight. And then, of course, Ms. Sharon Caseo too, as far as her role with instructional services. And then also wanted to direct you to our website as well. We have an LCAP website where we will post all these presentations, our plans, and the video of tonight's meeting, as well as information about upcoming meetings. So our next meeting that we have scheduled will be when we return from spring break. And so that will be March 29th, Wednesday, March 29th. So we'll send out an update through our email blast about that meeting. We hope to see you all there. If we don't have any other questions, that's all the presentation we have for this evening. Okay, well, thank you, everyone. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording, and we will see you all on the 29th. Thank you.